I am Clement, 32 years old, and I value my independence more than anything. That quiet Sunday evening, I sat stunned at my parents' dinner table as they casually announced my sister would be moving into my apartment. Not asked, announced. Their words hung in the air like a verdict, while I nodded silently. What they misread as acceptance was actually calculation. 1 week later, when they arrived with a car full of her belongings, they got the surprise of their lives. The stranger who opened my door changed everything between us forever. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If your family has ever steamrolled your boundaries, smash that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. To understand why I reacted the way I did, you need to know a bit about my family. My parents, Martin and Barbara, are as traditional as they come. Dad worked the same accounting job for 35 years while Mom managed the household with military precision. They raised us with unwavering beliefs about family loyalty and obligation that brooked no argument. Growing up, our household operated on a simple hierarchy. Parents decided, children complied. This worked well enough during childhood. But as I entered adulthood, the expectation that they would continue directing my life created increasing friction. My sister Heather, 4 years younger at 26, never seemed to mind this arrangement. She embraced the role of the perpetual child, allowing our parents to guide her decisions well into her 20s. From the beginning, Heather was the favorite. Not that my parents would ever admit this, but the evidence was undeniable. When I received B's on my report card, I got lectures about applying myself. When Heather brought home the same grades, she received praise for trying her best. When I wanted to join the track team, I had to promise it wouldn't affect my studies. When Heather wanted to quit piano lessons after 6 years of investment, they accepted her decision without question. Don't get me wrong, I love my sister. She has a bubbly personality that lights up rooms, and she's genuinely kind-hearted. But our parents' different treatment created an unspoken tension between us. I had to fight for every inch of independence while she received it as a gift whenever convenient. After college, I took a job in Boston, deliberately choosing a city 3 hours from my hometown. This geographical buffer helped me establish boundaries that proximity would have eroded. I found a 1-bedroom apartment in a renovated brownstone near the Innovation District. At 900 square feet, it wasn't spacious, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every book on the shelves, every print on the walls reflected my choices, not my mother's decorating preferences or my father's practical considerations. My living room featured a comfortable gray sectional facing a modest entertainment center. My collection of science fiction novels filled a bookcase beside a small desk where I sometimes worked from home. The kitchen was barely big enough for one person, but I'd learned to cook decent meals there. The bedroom fit little more than a queen bed and dresser, but the morning light through the east-facing windows made it feel like a sanctuary. This apartment represented more than just living space. It was tangible proof of my independence, a physical boundary between my adult life and my role as a son. I paid $1,600 in rent each month, not because I couldn't find cheaper options farther from the city, but because the location and privacy were worth every penny. My career as a software developer had progressed steadily since graduation. Starting as a junior programmer at a financial technology startup, I worked my way to senior developer over 7 years. The promotion 6 months ago came with a substantial raise that finally let me start saving for a down payment on my own place. If everything went according to plan, I could be a homeowner within 18 months. Meanwhile, Heather's career path resembled a pinball machine. After graduating with a communications degree, she bounced between marketing assistant roles, social media management, event planning, and most recently, content creation for a local lifestyle brand. None of these positions lasted more than a year. Each transition came with a story about toxic workplaces, mismatched expectations, or the ever-popular need to find something that sparked joy. Between jobs, she inevitably moved back to our parents' house, where Dad covered her car payments and Mom did her laundry. Each time, They assured her she could stay as long as needed. Each time, I bit my tongue during family dinners when the conversation turned to her latest career exploration. The truth is, Heather never had to develop financial responsibility because there were never consequences for her choices. Rent due but spent too much on weekend trips with friends, Dad would transfer the money. Car needs repairs, but savings account is empty, Mom would mention how they were happy to help until she got back on her feet. The same safety net existed for me in theory, but not in practice. When I struggled during a 2-month employment gap after my first company downsized, my father's response was to email me job listings and remind me about the importance of an emergency fund. The unspoken expectation was clear. I was the son, the man, and I needed to handle my problems independently. Heather was the daughter, more delicate, more deserving of protection. I accepted this double standard as unchangeable and built my life accordingly. I maintained cordial family relationships with clear boundaries. I visited for major holidays and called my mother weekly. I attended the mandatory monthly family dinners, but developed a knack for deflecting personal questions with vague answers. I loved my family, but I loved my independence more. This carefully constructed balance worked reasonably well until that fateful Sunday dinner when everything changed. The monthly Parker family dinner was a tradition I both dreaded and resigned myself to. That particular Sunday in April was no exception. I'd had a challenging week debugging a persistent error in our payment processing system and would have preferred a quiet evening at home. Instead, I found myself driving the familiar route to my parents' suburban home, mentally rehearsing acceptable answers to the inevitable questions about my work, social life, and future plans. Spring had finally arrived in New England, and my parents' meticulous lawn showed the first signs of green. Dad had already positioned the garden gnomes my mother collected along the stone path to the front door. The house looked exactly as it always had, a monument to comfortable predictability. Mom greeted me with her usual kiss on the cheek and comment about how I looked like I needed more sleep. Dad clapped me on the shoulder and immediately launched into a story about their neighbor's new boat. Heather hadn't arrived yet, so I helped Mom finish dinner preparations while making appropriate noises of interest about Dad's upcoming golf tournament. When Heather finally arrived 20 minutes late, something seemed off. Her normally vibrant energy appeared dimmed, and she avoided direct eye contact during her apologetic entrance. I filed this observation away, but didn't think much of it as we sat down to Mom's roast chicken dinner. The first half of the meal progressed normally. Mom dominated the conversation with updates about relatives I barely remembered and neighbors I'd never met. Dad interjected with commentary about the economy and his predictions for the stock market. Heather picked at her food and contributed little beyond agreement with whatever was said. I was midway through explaining a simplified version of my current project when Mom interrupted. "Oh, before I forget, Heather will be staying with you for a while, Clement." Her tone was so casual she might have been mentioning a change in the weather. I froze with my fork halfway to my mouth. "What do you mean, staying with me?" I asked, certain I had misunderstood. Dad jumped in while cutting his chicken. "Heather's landlord sold the building. New owners want to renovate and double the rent. She needs to be out by the end of the month. Your sister needs somewhere to stay," Mom continued, passing the green beans. "It makes perfect sense for her to use your spare room until she finds a new place." "I don't have a spare room," I said slowly. "I have a 1-bedroom apartment." Mom waved her hand dismissively. "The living room, then. That couch of yours pulls out, doesn't it? It's just temporary." I looked at Heather, who was studying her plate with intense focus. Her cheeks had flushed pink. "How long is temporary?" I asked, directing the question to my sister. Before she could answer, Dad cut in. "As long as it takes to find a decent apartment in her budget. The market's tough right now." "Which is why we thought of you," Mom added. "Family helps family, Clement. You have space, and your sister needs it. Simple as that." My mind raced as I processed what was happening. Not only had they made this decision without consulting me, but they were presenting it as if my agreement was a foregone conclusion. As if my home, my private space that I worked hard for, was a family resource to be allocated as they saw fit. "Don't you think this is something you should have discussed with me first?" I asked, struggling to keep my tone neutral. Mom looked genuinely confused. "Why? It's not like you'd say no to helping your sister." And there it was, the assumption that had defined our family dynamics forever. Of course, Clement wouldn't say no. Clement never says no. Clement is reliable, practical, accommodating Clement. I glanced at Heather, who finally met my eyes with an apologetic look. "I told them I could find another solution," she said quietly. "But they insisted this made the most sense." "It does make the most sense," Dad stated firmly. "Paying for a hotel is wasteful when your brother has perfectly good space going unused. Plus, you two can split expenses. It will help you save up for a new security deposit faster. My apartment, my sanctuary from work, stress, and family expectations, suddenly felt like community property. The thought of coming home to someone else's presence after my carefully guarded independence made my stomach tighten. But looking at the expectant faces around the table, I recognized a familiar impasse. Arguing would accomplish nothing. My parents had already made up their minds, and any resistance would be interpreted as selfishness. I'd be reminded of all the ways they had helped me, how family stands together in difficult times, how disappointed they were in my reluctance. Instead of engaging in a futile debate, I made a split-second decision. I would neither agree nor disagree. I would simply let them believe what they wanted while I developed an alternative plan. "When exactly are you thinking this would happen?" I asked neutrally. "Next Sunday would be ideal," Mom said, visibly relaxing at what she perceived as acceptance. "Your father can help with the heavy lifting, and I'll bring some groceries to stock your fridge. I know how you boys eat," she added with a laugh. For the next 30 minutes, they outlined their plan in excruciating detail. Mom had already selected which of Heather's furniture would go into storage, and which essential pieces would come to my apartment. Dad had calculated the most efficient loading order for his SUV. They'd even decided which of my kitchen cabinets would be most suitable for Heather's special dietary needs. Throughout this discussion, I nodded and asked clarifying questions while inwardly my resolve hardened. The more they planned without any consideration for my input, the more determined I became to assert control over my own space. When dinner finally ended, Heather followed me outside as I prepared to leave. "I'm sorry about this," she said, genuine distress in her voice. "I really did tell them I could figure something else out." I believed her. Heather might accept our parents' help too readily, but she wasn't manipulative. "Don't worry about it," I said, keys in hand. "Things will work out." She looked relieved, interpreting my response as acceptance rather than the strategic ambiguity I intended. As I drove back to Boston, my mind was already forming a plan. The drive back to Boston should have taken 3 hours. That night, I made it in 2 hours and 40 minutes, fueled by a combination of adrenaline and indignation that kept my foot heavy on the accelerator. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel as conversations from dinner replayed in my mind. The casual way they had discussed rearranging my kitchen cabinets, as if my apartment were simply an extension of their house. The dismissive response when I pointed out I didn't have a spare bedroom. The absolute certainty that I couldn't refuse. By the time I unlocked my apartment door, anger had crystallized into determination. I stood in the middle of my living room, looking at the space that represented 7 years of independence. The sectional couch where I read on weekend mornings. The coffee table that held water rings from countless game nights with friends. The bookshelves organized exactly how I liked them. All of it was about to be disrupted because no one in my family believed my boundaries deserved respect. I considered my options carefully. Direct confrontation was the obvious approach, calling my parents and firmly stating that Heather could not stay with me. But experience had taught me this would lead nowhere productive. They would express disappointment, remind me of family obligations, and ultimately wear down my resistance through persistent guilt. Another option was setting boundaries through reasoned conversation, explaining why this arrangement wouldn't work and suggesting alternatives. But this assumed they were interested in my perspective, which dinner had clearly shown they weren't. They had moved straight from problem to solution, without considering my input as relevant. The third conventional option was simply accepting the situation. Let Heather move in temporarily, endure the disruption, and hope it ended quickly. This was the path of least resistance, the one my family expected me to take, the responsible, accommodating son doing his duty. As I considered these options, my phone buzzed with a text from my friend Marcus. How was family dinner? Survive intact? Marcus knew my family dynamics well. We'd been friends since college, and he'd witnessed firsthand the complex dance I performed to maintain both family relationships and personal boundaries. His message sparked an alternative approach that I hadn't considered. What if I simply wasn't home when they arrived with Heather's belongings? What if someone else was? I called Marcus immediately. "Hey man, weird question," I said when he answered. "Are you still looking for a place to stay while your apartment is being treated for mold?" Marcus had mentioned his temporary housing problem the previous week when his building discovered a serious mold issue that required all tenants to vacate for treatment. "Yeah, I'm crashing on Jordan's couch but overstaying my welcome." "Why? How would you feel about staying at my place next weekend?" "I need someone to be here when my family arrives." I explained the situation, detailing my parents' unilateral decision and my reluctance to confront them directly. "So you want me to be the unexpected occupant who throws a wrench in their plans?" Marcus asked, amusement evident in his voice. "Exactly. You would be legitimately staying there while I'm conveniently away at that tech conference in New York. Not my fault if they made assumptions about my availability or living situation without checking with me first." The plan crystallized as we spoke. I would attend the Tech Forward conference in New York City, which I'd been considering anyway. Marcus would stay at my apartment for the weekend, with full permission to use the space since I would be gone. When my family arrived with Heather's belongings, they would discover their plans were based on faulty assumptions. This approach appealed to me because it wasn't confrontational in the traditional sense. I wouldn't be saying no directly. Reality would be saying no for me. And most importantly, it would force a recognition that my living space wasn't theirs to allocate. "You realize this could cause a major family blow-up," Marcus cautioned. "Probably," I acknowledged. But they crossed a line. If I don't establish boundaries now, this pattern will continue forever. Over the next day, I refined my plan. I registered for the conference and booked a hotel in Manhattan for Friday through Sunday. I arranged for Marcus to pick up my spare key on Thursday evening. I even prepared my apartment, clearing some closet space and removing personal items I wouldn't want a temporary guest to access. The only thing I didn't do was directly inform my family of any of these arrangements. When Mom called on Tuesday to discuss what bedding Heather would need, I let her talk without contradiction. When Dad texted on Wednesday about arrival times, I responded with vague acknowledgement. When Heather sent a message asking if I preferred she bring her own towels, I replied that she should do whatever was most convenient for her. At no point did I explicitly lie. I simply allowed them to continue with their assumptions while making my own arrangements. Was it passive-aggressive? Absolutely. But it felt like my only option for breaking a lifelong pattern where direct communication was steamrolled. By Thursday night, my plan was fully in place. Marcus arrived with a duffel bag containing his clothes for the weekend, and I gave him a detailed tour of the apartment. "Bathroom's all yours. Kitchen stocked with basics. Wi-Fi password is on the fridge. I'll be back Sunday evening," I told him, handing over the spare key. "What exactly should I say when they show up?" he asked. "Just the truth. You're staying here while I'm out of town at a conference. And I didn't mention anything about my sister moving in, because no one actually confirmed that with me. As I packed my own bag for New York, I felt a complex mix of emotions. There was guilt about the surprise and disappointment my family would experience. There was anxiety about the confrontation that would inevitably follow. But underneath it all was a bedrock certainty that this boundary was necessary, even if the method was indirect. Friday morning, I left for New York with my phone fully charged, but my notifications muted. Whatever happened at my apartment the next day, I would deal with the aftermath when I returned. For now, I had a conference to attend and a long overdue boundary to establish. The week leading up to the weekend unfolded with an increasing sense of inevitability, like watching storm clouds gather on the horizon. Monday morning brought a detailed text from my mother listing the items Heather would bring to brighten up that dreary apartment of yours. Apparently, my deliberately neutral decor needed her colorful throw pillows and framed inspirational quotes. I responded with a thumbs-up emoji, the digital equivalent of a non-committal grunt. By Monday afternoon, Dad had texted about the optimal route to avoid weekend traffic, complete with his estimated arrival time of 11 a.m. sharp on Sunday. I sent back a simple, "Got it," which he could interpret however he wanted. Tuesday escalated the situation when Mom called during my lunch break to discuss sleeping arrangements in greater detail. "We're thinking the couch might not be ideal long-term," she began without preamble. "Your sister needs proper rest for her creative work. Would you consider giving her the bedroom and taking the couch yourself? Just until she finds her own place, of course." I nearly choked on my sandwich. Not only were they commandeering my apartment, but now they wanted me to surrender my bedroom as well. The audacity was almost impressive. "I don't think that would work with my schedule," I replied carefully. "I have early client calls that would disturb anyone sleeping in the living room." "Well, you'll figure something out," she said dismissively. "Family accommodates family." That phrase again. The ultimate trump card in the Parker household. Wednesday brought a text from Heather that momentarily shook my resolve. "Thanks for letting me crash at your place. I know it's not ideal and I promise to start apartment hunting right away. I really appreciate you helping me out." Her genuine gratitude for something I had never agreed to made me question my plan briefly. Was I being too harsh? Should I just accept the imposition temporarily? Then I received another message from Mom, this one informing me that she had taken the liberty of rescheduling my internet installation because Heather will be working from home and needs the faster package for her video uploads. I didn't have an internet upgrade scheduled. She had apparently called my provider, pretended to be me, and made changes to my service. The boundary violation was so brazen it eliminated any lingering doubt. The plan would proceed. Thursday morning, Dad sent a list of local storage facilities he'd researched for Heather's excess furniture, with a note that we could discuss splitting the cost on Sunday. The presumption that I would share storage expenses for her belongings further cemented my determination. That evening, as I handed Marcus my spare key, the weight of the coming confrontation settled heavily on my shoulders. "You sure about this?" he asked, sensing my tension. "Too late to back out now," I replied. Though in truth, I could have called my family at any point to prevent the coming collision. "For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing," Marcus offered. "Sometimes you have to create a scene to be seen." His support bolstered my resolve. I finished packing for the conference, double-checking I had everything needed for 3 days away. As I zipped my suitcase, my phone buzzed with a final text from Heather. "Looking forward to sibling time this weekend. I brought Cards Against Humanity and that bourbon you like. See you Sunday." Her message carried no hint of entitlement, just genuine enthusiasm about spending time together. Unlike our parents, Heather wasn't deliberately disrespecting my boundaries. She was simply following the family pattern established long before either of us could recognize it. For a moment, I considered texting her the truth, warning her about the situation she was about to walk into. But doing so would undermine the entire point. This wasn't just about Heather. It was about establishing once and for all that decisions about my living space required my explicit consent. I set my phone to Do Not Disturb mode for all contacts, except the conference organizers, and tried to focus on the professional opportunities awaiting me in New York, rather than the family drama unfolding in Boston. Friday morning, I left early, stopping only to give Marcus final instructions. "If things get ugly, you have my permission to leave. Don't put yourself in an uncomfortable position for my sake." "Don't worry," he assured me. "I deal with unreasonable clients all day. I can handle disappointed parents for a few minutes." As I drove to New York, a strange calm settled over me. The decision was made, the plan in motion. Whatever happened next would force a long overdue conversation about respect and boundaries in my family. Whether that conversation would heal or further damage our relationship remained to be seen, but the status quo had become unsustainable. By Friday evening, as I attended the conference welcome reception, my phone showed multiple texts from my mother about final preparations and a reminder from Dad about their Sunday arrival time. I silenced the notifications and focused on networking with industry colleagues, pushing family concerns to tomorrow's problem. Saturday passed in a blur of technical sessions and professional conversations, a welcome distraction from the approaching confrontation. I checked in briefly with Marcus, who confirmed all was well at the apartment. My family continued their one-sided planning, unaware of the disruption awaiting them. Saturday night, I lay awake in my hotel room, imagining the scene that would unfold the next morning. The drive to my apartment building, arms loaded with Heather's belongings. The confident approach to my door, the knock expecting my welcome. And then Marcus opening the door, a stranger in the space they had allocated to their daughter. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by anxiety dreams about family arguments. When my alarm went off Sunday morning, I silenced my phone completely. Whatever happened at my apartment, I would deal with the aftermath when I was ready. Sunday morning found me sitting in a conference room at the Marriott Marquis in Times Square, ostensibly listening to a presentation about emerging back-end technologies. In reality, my thoughts were 3 hours north in Boston, where my family was likely packing Heather's essential belongings into Dad's SUV. The speaker's words about data architecture washed over me without registering as I checked my watch repeatedly. By my calculation, they would arrive at my apartment around 11, assuming Dad's notorious punctuality held true. It was now 9:30. The butterflies in my stomach felt more like angry wasps. I had deliberately turned off my phone before the session, unable to focus with the constant temptation to check for messages. This self-imposed isolation meant I had no idea if they had tried to contact me that morning, perhaps to confirm plans or announce a change in arrival time. The uncertainty added another layer of anxiety to an already tense situation. When the session ended at 10:30, I found a quiet corner of the hotel lobby and turned my phone back on. It immediately lit up with notifications. 2 missed calls from Mom, 1 from Dad, and a text from Heather saying they were about to leave and asking if I needed anything from the grocery store near my apartment. I put the phone back in my pocket without responding. What could I possibly say at this point that wouldn't either perpetuate the charade or prematurely trigger the confrontation? Better to let events unfold as planned. For the next hour, I nursed an overpriced coffee in the hotel lobby, simultaneously dreading and anticipating the moment when my family would arrive at my apartment. I imagined my father's confident knock, his expectation of immediate access to a space he viewed as an extension of family property. I pictured my mother's arms filled with home goods she deemed essential improvements to my bachelor lifestyle, and Heather, perhaps trailing behind, with mixed emotions about imposing on her brother's space. What I couldn't fully anticipate was their reaction when Marcus opened the door instead of me. At 12:15, my phone rang. Dad's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello? What the hell is going on, Clement?" His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "We're standing outside your apartment building with your sister's things, and some guy named Marcus says he's staying at your place while you're out of town. Is this some kind of joke?" The confrontation had begun. "I'm at a tech conference in New York," I said calmly. "Marcus is watching my apartment while I'm gone." "What are you doing there?" Playing dumb wasn't my proudest moment, but it forced him to explicitly state the assumptions they had made. "What am I doing here?" His voice rose sharply. "We're here to move your sister in, as we discussed last week. Your mother is in tears, Heather is humiliated, and you're pretending you don't know what's happening. We never actually discussed it, Dad. You and Mom announced it and started making plans without asking if it worked for me. I never agreed to this arrangement." The line went quiet for a moment then. "So this is your way of saying no? Creating this embarrassing situation, instead of just telling us directly? His framing made me the villain, the creator of the problem, rather than the responder to a boundary violation. Would you have listened if I had said no directly? I countered. Another pause. This is about your sister needing help, Clement. Family helps family. This is about you and Mom making decisions about my living space without my consent, I corrected. Where is everyone now? Standing on the sidewalk with a car full of your sister's belongings, thanks to your childish stunt. The background noise suggested they were indeed outside. I could hear my mother's voice, asking who he was talking to. Put Mom on the phone, please. A rustling sound. Then my mother's tearful voice. Clement, how could you do this to your sister? She has nowhere to go now. The guilt trip was immediate and practiced. That's not true, Mom. She could stay with you and Dad temporarily, like she has before. Or she could find a short-term rental. Or stay with friends. There are options that don't involve commandeering my apartment without my permission. We didn't think we needed permission to help family, she said, her voice wavering between hurt and indignation. We raised you better than this, Clement. You raised me to be independent and responsible, I countered. I'm merely expecting the same respect for my space that you would demand for yours. This circular conversation continued for several minutes, with my parents alternating between anger and disappointment, while I maintained my position that prior consultation was a reasonable expectation. Eventually, I asked to speak with Heather. When she came on the line, her voice was small and embarrassed. Hey, I'm sorry you're in this awkward situation, I said sincerely. But I need you to understand that this isn't about you. It's about Mom and Dad making decisions about my life without talking to me first. You could have just said no, she replied, a hint of hurt breaking through the embarrassment. Would that have worked? Or would they have worn me down until I gave in, like always? Her silence was answer enough. Where will you go now? I asked. Back to Mom and Dad's, I guess. Like always. The resignation in her voice reflected her awareness of the pattern we were both trapped in. For what it's worth, if they had asked me instead of telling me, I might have considered a short-term arrangement, but not like this. After we hung up, Marcus called to give me his perspective on what had happened. Dude, that was intense, he began. Your dad looked like he was going to explode when I opened the door. Your mom kept saying there must be some mistake. Your sister just stood there looking mortified. What exactly did you tell them? I asked. Just what we agreed. That I'm staying at your place while you're at a conference in New York, and that you hadn't mentioned anything about your sister moving in. Your dad didn't believe me at first, kept insisting I must be confused about dates. Marcus described how my father had demanded to speak with building management, apparently believing Marcus was some kind of squatter. When the building superintendent confirmed that Marcus was indeed an authorized guest, the reality of the situation had finally sunk in. After they called you, they had a heated discussion right there in the hallway, Marcus continued. Your dad wanted to wait until you got back to sort this out. Your mom was saying something about alternative arrangements. Your sister just kept saying she wanted to leave. According to Marcus, they had eventually departed with the car still full of Heather's belongings, my father stone-faced, my mother dabbing at her eyes, and my sister walking quickly ahead of them both. After thanking Marcus for handling the situation, I spent the remainder of the conference day going through the motions, my mind entirely occupied with the aftermath awaiting me when I returned to Boston. I had achieved my immediate goal of preventing the unilateral occupation of my apartment, but at what cost to family relationships? Sunday evening, I returned to my apartment to find Marcus watching a football game with a pizza box open on the coffee table. Welcome back to the scene of the crime, he joked as I set down my suitcase. That bad? I asked, dropping onto the couch beside him. Let's just say I don't think I'll be invited to Parker family Thanksgiving. After Marcus left, I finally checked my phone properly. The damage was extensive. 17 missed calls, 32 text messages, and 5 voicemails distributed among my immediate family members. The text messages told a story of rapidly evolving emotions. Early messages expressed confusion and disbelief. These gave way to anger and accusations, followed by attempts at guilt induction. By evening, The tone had shifted to cold formality from my parents and hurt silence from Heather. The most recent message, from my father, simply stated, "Family meeting tomorrow night, 7 p.m., non-negotiable." I spent that night preparing for the confrontation, mentally rehearsing my points about boundaries and respect. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by imagined versions of the coming argument. By morning, I felt equally exhausted and resolved. Monday passed in a blur of work meetings where I struggled to focus on code reviews and project timelines, while the impending family showdown loomed. When 5:30 arrived, I began the familiar drive to my parents' suburban home, each mile increasing the tightness in my chest. I arrived at 6:55, deliberately timing my entrance to avoid extended pre-meeting tension. Mom opened the door without her usual hug or cheek kiss, her face a mask of disappointed neutrality. Dad sat in his recliner, hands clasped in his lap like a judge about to pass sentence. Heather perched uncomfortably on the edge of the couch, looking like she wished to be anywhere else. "Sit down," Dad said, gesturing to the empty chair positioned to face all of them. The arrangement felt deliberately tribunal-like. I sat and waited, determined to let them speak first. "I think you owe your sister an apology," Dad began, cutting straight to his conclusion without preamble. "For what specifically?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "For the humiliating stunt you pulled yesterday," Mom interjected. "Do you have any idea how it felt to stand there with the car packed full, only to have a strange man tell us you weren't even in town?" "About as uncomfortable as it felt to have my apartment assigned to Heather without anyone asking me first," I replied evenly. "We told you about the arrangement at dinner last week," Dad countered. "You had plenty of opportunity to speak up if you had concerns. You didn't tell me. You informed me. There's a difference. Telling implies I had no say in the matter." "This is ridiculous," Mom said, throwing up her hands. "Since when do family members need formal permission to help each other? We raised you to understand that family comes first. Family should include respect for boundaries," I said. "Would you have been okay with me giving out keys to your house without asking you first?" "That's completely different," Dad dismissed. "We're your parents, and I'm an adult with my own home that I pay for. The fact that you can't see the parallel is exactly the problem." The conversation continued in this circular fashion, with my parents unable or unwilling to recognize their overstepping. Every attempt to explain my perspective was countered with appeals to family obligation or dismissals of my concerns as selfish. Throughout this exchange, Heather remained silent, her eyes fixed on the floor. When there was finally a lull in the argument, I addressed her directly. "Heather, I want you to know that my issue isn't with you needing a place to stay. It's with how this was handled." She looked up, her expression a mix of hurt and understanding. "I get it. I should have called you directly, instead of letting Mom and Dad take over. But you could have just said no, instead of setting up that." "Would saying no directly have worked?" I asked, looking pointedly at our parents. "Or would I have been guilted and pressured until I gave in?" No one answered immediately, the truth of our family dynamic hanging awkwardly in the air. "The fact that you felt you had to be so dramatic to be heard says something about this family that I don't like," Heather finally said quietly. Mom bristled visibly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means maybe Clement has a point about how we make decisions," Heather replied, surprising me with her support. I was uncomfortable with how this was handled too, but I went along with it because that's what we always do. Mom and Dad decide, and we comply. Dad's face darkened. We were trying to solve a problem efficiently. All this talk about feelings and boundaries is unnecessarily complicated. It's only complicated because you're refusing to acknowledge that I deserve a say in what happens in my own home, I insisted, feeling a new surge of frustration. The conversation deteriorated further from there, with Mom eventually dissolving into tears, and Dad accusing me of selfishness and ingratitude. When it became clear we were talking in circles, I stood to leave. "This isn't productive. I'm going home." "That's right. Run away instead of resolving this," Dad snapped. "I'm not running away. I'm removing myself from a situation where my perspective isn't being heard. We can try again when everyone is calmer. If you walk out that door, don't expect things to just go back to normal, Mom warned through tears. Normal is exactly what I'm trying to change, I replied, picking up my jacket. Normal hasn't been working for me for a long time. As I left, Heather followed me outside. That was intense, she said as we stood by my car. I'm sorry you got caught in the middle of this. She shrugged. Maybe it needed to happen. I'm staying with Sarah from work until I figure something out, by the way. Just so you know, I'm not homeless. I never thought you were, I assured her. Despite what Mom and Dad believe, I don't actually want you to suffer. I just wanted my boundaries respected. We parted with an awkward hug, the future of our family relationships uncertain. As I drove back to Boston, I felt both drained and oddly liberated. The confrontation had gone about as poorly as expected, but at least the issues were now in the open rather than simmering beneath forced politeness. Whether this rupture would heal or widen remained to be seen, but for the first time in my adult life, I had explicitly claimed my independence rather than carefully negotiating around my family's expectations. Whatever came next, that felt like progress. The weeks following our family confrontation unfolded in stages of uncomfortable silence punctuated by tentative communication. My mother's prediction that things wouldn't just go back to normal proved accurate, but not in the way she had threatened. The first week, my parents maintained complete radio silence, presumably expecting me to crack under the weight of guilt and make amends. I resisted the ingrained urge to apologize for standing my ground and instead used the quiet to reflect on our family dynamics. My apartment, once again entirely my own, felt both peaceful and slightly empty. Without the threat of invasion hanging over it, I could appreciate my space with renewed gratitude. Each evening after work, I returned to rooms arranged exactly as I had left them, a physical manifestation of the boundaries I had finally established. Friends proved invaluable during this period. Marcus checked in regularly, offering both support and occasional reality checks when my resolve wavered. My colleague Jordan, who had navigated her own family boundary issues, reminded me that temporary discomfort was the price of lasting change. Their perspectives helped counter the doubt that crept in during quiet moments. Families have enormous gravitational pull, Jordan explained over lunch in the office cafeteria. Breaking out of unhealthy patterns feels like escaping a planet's atmosphere. It takes tremendous energy, and there's a lot of heat and friction. But once you're clear, you can establish a new orbit on your terms. Her metaphor stayed with me, helping frame the silence, not as punishment, but as necessary adjustment space. The second week brought the first crack in the ice when Heather texted to check in. Our conversation started cautiously but gradually warmed as we discussed her job search and apartment hunting rather than family tension. Found a studio apartment closer to downtown, she wrote. Smaller than my old place, but actually affordable without raiding the bank of Dad. That's great, I responded, genuinely pleased. Self-sufficiency is underrated. Speaking of which, she continued, I'm selling a bunch of stuff I don't need. Turns out when you pay for your own storage, you get really clear about what's worth keeping. Her comment suggested a shift in perspective that extended beyond real estate to our shared family dynamics. When we met for coffee that weekend, this became explicit. I've been thinking about what happened, she said, stirring her latte. At first, I was just embarrassed and angry about being caught in the middle. But honestly, I think it forced me to look at some patterns I've been participating in. She explained how our parents' well-intentioned support had become a crutch that prevented her from developing true independence. Each bailout, each solved problem, each decision made on her behalf had subtly reinforced her role as the perpetual child in need of guidance. Don't get me wrong. I'm still mad about how you handled it, she clarified. But I get why you felt you had to make such a dramatic statement. They really don't hear no very well, do they? Her insight created a new bond between us, a shared recognition of the patterns that had shaped our adult relationships with our parents. For perhaps the first time, we spoke as equals, rather than as the responsible older brother and the protected younger sister. By the third week, Mom broke her silence, with a text that read simply, "Hope you're eating properly." This oblique olive branch, focused on nurturing rather than the conflict itself, was typical of her approach to disagreement. I responded with a photo of a home-cooked meal, an equally indirect acceptance of the tentative reconnection. Dad took longer. It wasn't until the 4th week that he called, ostensibly to ask a technical question about his computer, but clearly searching for neutral ground to re-establish communication. We spoke for 15 minutes about operating system updates and cloud storage before he cleared his throat awkwardly. "Your mother misses your weekly calls," he said, the closest he could come to expressing his own feelings. "I'll call her tomorrow," I promised. "Good. That's good." Another pause. "The monthly family dinner is coming up this Sunday." The invitation hung implicitly in his statement. "I'll be there," I said. "But Dad, we need to talk about what happened. Not just pretend it didn't." He sighed heavily. "I suppose we do. But maybe not all at once, all right?" It was a small concession, but a meaningful one. An acknowledgement that the conversation wasn't closed, even if he wasn't ready to fully engage with it yet. That Sunday dinner marked a cautious reset of family relations. The conversation remained deliberately light, focusing on safe topics like Dad's golf game and Mom's garden plans. Heather shared news about her new apartment, emphasizing her independent decision-making in a way that felt pointedly directed at our parents. As the evening progressed, I observed subtle shifts in our family dynamic. Mom asked before serving me seconds rather than simply filling my plate. Dad framed suggestions as questions rather than directives. Small changes, but significant in their recognition of adult autonomy. After dinner, as Heather and I cleared the table, she nudged me gently. "They're trying," she whispered, in their own stunted way. "I know," I acknowledged. "It's a start." Over the following months, our family relationship gradually evolved into something more balanced. The process wasn't linear. There were setbacks and old patterns that resurfaced during moments of stress. But the fundamental recognition that boundaries deserved respect had been established, however awkwardly. Heather flourished in her new independence, taking greater ownership of her career decisions and financial management. She even declined Dad's offer to co-sign her new apartment lease, preferring to pay a slightly higher security deposit to maintain complete autonomy. "It costs more up front," she told me during one of our now regular sibling dinners, "but it's worth it to know it's entirely mine." Her words echoed my own feelings about my apartment, the importance of spaces that belonged wholly to ourselves. The most meaningful change came 6 months after the confrontation, when Mom called to ask if Heather could stay with me for a weekend while visiting Boston for a job interview. "Of course, if that works for both of you," she added carefully. "We understand it's your space and your decision." Those words, so simple, yet so profound in their acknowledgement of my autonomy, represented the real resolution to our conflict. Not an erased boundary, but a respected one. Not an absence of requests, but the presence of genuine choice. Looking back on that Sunday when Marcus opened my door to my shocked family, I recognize it as a necessary disruption of patterns too entrenched to be changed through conventional conversation. The dramatic nature of my boundary setting reflected the dramatic nature of its violation. While I might handle it differently now that channels of authentic communication have opened, I don't regret forcing the issue. Family relationships are complicated territories where love and control often masquerade as each other. Learning to disentangle them is a lifelong process that requires honesty, courage, and sometimes a willingness to create uncomfortable situations when words alone prove insufficient. The apartment that was once the site of our conflict has become a symbol of healthy boundaries. When family visits now, they call ahead. When they make suggestions about my life, they frame them as options rather than decisions. And most importantly, when I express a preference or set a limit, they may not always agree, but they acknowledge my right to do so. These changes didn't come easily or without cost. There were tears, anger, and periods of distance that tested all our commitments to the relationship. But through that difficult process, we've arrived at a more authentic connection based on mutual respect rather than assumed compliance. If there's one lesson I've learned from this experience, it's that true family support respects autonomy rather than overriding it. Love without boundaries isn't more generous. It's less honest. And sometimes, the most loving thing we can do for our families and ourselves is to draw clear lines around our individual lives, even when doing so creates temporary discomfort. So if you're facing similar boundary challenges with your family, remember that setting limits isn't selfish. It's necessary for authentic relationships. Have you ever had to take dramatic steps to establish boundaries with loved ones? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need permission to protect their own boundaries. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that saying no to others sometimes means saying yes to yourself.